I didn't buy this house to make friends. I bought it because it was the first place I ever felt like I could breathe. Every morning, I walked barefoot across the wood floors, listening to the creaks and soft groans of the boards like a song that belonged to me. The air always smelled like coffee and lemon oil because I wiped down the counters even if they weren't dirty. Outside, the sprinklers clicked on at 6, washing over the grass that I had coaxed back from brown patches when the previous owners let it die. The house was mine, but the land was something I had to earn. The neighborhood was quiet in that forced, step-forward kind of way, where everything was beige, and even the children's laughter seemed to come at the right volume. Cars were the same 3 models in different shades of silver. The mailboxes had to be black, approved by the HOA with a sticker on the back that said compliant. God help you if your sticker peeled off, because they would notice. They always noticed. Most days I felt invisible, and I liked it that way. Nobody waved except for Miss Hargrove, who was always out with her dog that barked at me like I was a stranger no matter how many times it saw me. She would say, "Good morning," in that bright, forced tone while her eyes slid down to check what I was wearing, like she was cataloging whether I belonged. They never said anything outright, but there was always that look. I was the only black homeowner on the street, and that meant I was always the one being watched, even when nobody was looking directly at me. Once, at a block party, a neighbor I barely knew leaned in with wine breath and told me, "We're so glad to have diversity here." Like it was a compliment or like I was a quota they had finally managed to hit. Still, I kept to myself. I paid my HOA dues, kept the grass cut, and nodded politely at the quarterly newsletters that told me which paint shades I was allowed to use for my front door. I wasn't here to fight them. I just wanted to live. That morning, I was out front, trimming the hedge that separated my yard from the sidewalk, careful not to let a single branch droop past the property line. A blue jay flitted down to peck at the grass, and for a moment, the world felt clean. Sunlight glinted off the freshly washed driveway. My coffee steamed in the breeze. Then I noticed a white car parked across the street. The kind of car the HOA people like to drive, with the magnetic logo on the door and the tinted windows rolled halfway down. A woman was in the passenger seat, pointing at my yard, and a man was taking notes on a clipboard. I couldn't hear them, but I could see the way they nodded, looking at my home like it was a problem they needed to fix. I felt that small, tight feeling in my stomach, the one that said don't start something. So, I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just watched, hedge clippers still in my hand, as they pointed again at the patch of grass near my porch, and then at the driveway, writing down whatever they thought needed correcting. When they drove away, the street felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Probably another note about the trash bins needing to be moved back by 6 p.m. or a reminder that my garden flag couldn't be more than 3 feet high. Small things that didn't matter. But as I went inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass of the storm door. I looked tired, even though it was early. There was a smudge of dirt on my cheek, and I wiped it off, trying to smooth my face back into the calm expression I wore around here. Because here, you couldn't look angry. You couldn't look annoyed, or inconvenienced, or even mildly frustrated. Here, I had to look like I was grateful to be here, to be part of the community, to be part of the street where everything was neat and nothing bad ever happened, as long as you followed the rules. And I had followed the rules. Every last one. I didn't know it yet, but that clipboard, that pointed finger, was the first small crack in the peaceful life I had built. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that would unravel everything I thought was safe in this house. Because when people like that look at your home like it's theirs to control, they don't stop at the color of your mailbox. They decide who gets to live in peace and who doesn't. And I was about to find out how far they would go. I didn't think about the clipboard again until the trucks started showing up. It was small at first, an unfamiliar white van parked in front of my house early on a Wednesday, men stepping out in neon vests, talking too loudly for the quiet of the street. They unrolled measuring tape across my front lawn, walking back and forth like surveyors. One of them waved at me with a bright, forced grin before continuing to pace across the grass I had spent 2 years carefully bringing back to life. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, trying to keep my voice calm. Can I help you with something? The man closest to me looked up, squinting against the sun. Just doing some measurements, ma'am. Won't take but a minute. For what? He paused, glancing back at another man who was now holding a clipboard, scribbling something down. The man shrugged. For the vent, I guess. What event? He gave me a look, like I was the one causing confusion, then tipped his chin politely and went back to measuring, ignoring the question entirely. They left soon after, rolling up tape measures, stepping around my flower beds with muddy boots, leaving flattened patches of grass behind. When they drove off, I stood on the porch for a long moment, the coffee cold in my hand, watching the street settle back into its fake quiet. That night, a slip of paper appeared on my porch, tucked under a small rock. It was from the HOA, of course, printed on thick white paper with the association's logo embossed at the top. Dear resident, it began, which was how I knew they didn't think of me as a person, but as a unit on their ledger, a checkbox on their map. We are pleased to inform you that your property has been selected as the venue for our upcoming community wedding event. I read the sentence twice, 3 times, trying to understand how it could be real. They talked about bringing the community together and celebrating love, and how your beautiful yard will be the perfect backdrop for this blessed event. There was a paragraph about parking arrangements, another about noise ordinances, assuring me that everything would be handled with the utmost care. Nowhere in the letter did it ask for my permission. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I folded the letter carefully, sliding it into the drawer next to my keys. For a moment, I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of lemon oil and last night's dinner lingering in the air, and tried to convince myself it was just a mix-up, a clerical error they would fix if I called. Because people didn't just schedule a wedding at your house without asking. That wasn't how the world worked. Except here, in this neighborhood, the rules were different. The rules were theirs. The next morning, I walked past the Hargrove house during my usual route, waving at Ms. Hargrove out of habit. She gave me that bright smile, eyes flicking to the street, then leaned in slightly. Isn't it so exciting? She said, her voice dropping to a whisper she clearly thought was conspiratorial. About the wedding, I mean. We haven't had something like this in years. So nice to have a space we can all use. I stopped, trying to keep my face neutral. They didn't ask me. She blinked, the smile freezing for half a second before it returned, even brighter this time. Oh, I'm sure it's just a formality, dear. We all have to pitch in sometimes. It's for the community. For the community. That was what they always said when they wanted you to give something you didn't want to give. That was what they said when they took over your space, your time, your peace, and made it theirs. That day, I called the HOA office, the number I had saved from the last time they tried to find me for having a trash bin visible from the street for too long. A woman answered, her voice sweet and sticky, like syrup dripping too slowly. Hi, I said, keeping my tone calm. I got the letter about the wedding at my house. I need to clarify that there must be a mistake. I'm not hosting anything here. Oh, she said, a small, practiced laugh. There's no mistake. The board decided it would be perfect for the event, and everything is already in motion. I didn't agree to that. A pause, just long enough to hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. It's already been approved by the board, ma'am. You'll barely notice we're there. I felt that tightness again, low in my chest, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. You can't just do this. Have a blessed day, she chirped before hanging up. The dial tone hummed in my ear, long and cold. Outside, the sun was setting over my yard, the light catching the trimmed hedges, the clean lines of my walkway, the flowers I had planted with my own hands. They had decided it was theirs, and they didn't even bother to ask. I tried to keep living my normal life, even as it felt like it was being erased piece by piece. Each morning, I still walked barefoot across the wood floors, reminding myself that this was my house, that I paid for it, that I built this piece with my own hands. I sipped my coffee while the sunrise spilled gold across the counters, the lemon oil scent clinging to the air, even as it was drowned out by the rumble of trucks outside. They were setting up the wedding stage now, hammering down wooden planks over the grass, driving heavy trucks up and down my driveway until cracks spiderwebbed across the concrete. Every hammer strike felt like it echoed in my chest. Every stranger walking across my lawn felt like a trespasser no one else could see. At night, the tents glowed under string lights they hung up without asking, swaying in the breeze, casting shadows that slipped across my bedroom walls while I tried to sleep. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the window, face lit by those lights, and I would see the tightness around my mouth, the exhaustion in my eyes. I looked like a stranger in my own home, but the neighborhood loved it. People strolled by with their dogs, taking photos, calling out to the workers about how beautiful it would all be, how lucky I was to be part of something special. They didn't see me, or if they did, they chose to look away. The day before the wedding, the HOA sent one last letter, slid under my door like a final insult. "We appreciate your cooperation," it read, "and know that your contribution to the community's joy will be remembered." Contribution. Like I had a choice. Like I had been part of any of this. I stood in my kitchen, the letter trembling in my hands, while the sounds of laughter and the clatter of final preparations floated in through the open window. Someone outside shouted instructions about flower placements, while another called for a test run on the speakers. That was the moment it snapped. It wasn't loud, the breaking inside of me. It was quiet, like a door closing, soft and final. I walked outside, across the driveway, stepping over extension cords and around boxes of white tablecloths. No one paid me any mind as I crossed the street to the little rental house where Mr. Sanchez lived, where he parked his big yellow bulldozer out front because the HOA had fined him for keeping it in the driveway too long. I knocked on his door, and when he opened it, I saw the way he tensed, like he was preparing for another complaint from the neighbors. Instead, I asked, "How much would it cost to rent your bulldozer for an hour?" He blinked, then blinked again, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Depends on what you need it for." I looked back across the street at my house, the tents, the folding chairs, the wedding arch standing where my roses used to bloom. "Taking my yard back," I said. His laughter was deep, rolling, and it felt like the first honest sound I had heard in days. He didn't even charge me much. He just handed me the keys, told me how to start it, and gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Call me if you need backup," he said. The engine roared to life under my hands, loud enough to shake the windows of the perfect beige houses lining the street. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out, faces pressed to the glass. The workers on my lawn froze, turning toward the sound, confusion painted across their faces. I drove it slowly at first, rolling over the curb, across the sidewalk, onto my lawn. One of the workers ran up, waving his arms, shouting, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I drove straight through the first row of folding chairs, the metal legs snapping under the weight, the white plastic seats shattering. I rolled over the speaker system, crushing it to silence. I drove through the wedding arch, splintering the cheap wood, the flowers scattering like confetti across the torn grass. People started screaming. Someone was calling the police. Neighbors were filming from their lawns, phones held high, mouths open in shock. I kept driving. I tore down every single piece of that wedding setup until there was nothing left but broken chairs, crushed flowers, and ruts in the dirt where the tents used to stand. When the police arrived, lights flashing, I was sitting on the bulldozer, engine idling, staring at what was left of my yard. They told me to step down, and I did. They asked me what happened, and I told them. They tried to take my home. I took it back. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. I woke up each morning at the same time, walked barefoot across the wood floors, and opened the curtains to let the sun rise in, painting gold across the walls I had chosen and paid for. I still brewed my coffee, still listened to the sprinklers click on, still wiped the counters down with lemon oil, even when they were already clean. But the peace wasn't real anymore. Because every morning, there was another van, another truck, another stranger stepping across my grass with heavy boots, setting down folding chairs and boxes of floral arrangements in neat, organized rows. They moved like they owned the place, calling to each other about setback distances and generator access, all without glancing at me when I stood in the doorway. Once I stepped out, crossed my arms, and asked a young man what he was doing. He didn't even look up from the crate of white folding chairs he was arranging on my driveway. "Set up for the wedding," he said. "We're just about done here." "Who told you to do this?" He finally glanced at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before he shrugged. "The HOA. It's all cleared, ma'am." And that was it. He went back to his work, turning his back to me as if I were nothing more than the breeze. They started bringing in tents next, the big white kind you see at outdoor weddings, anchored with heavy weights that crushed my flower beds and dug into the soft soil of my yard. I watched them drive stakes into the grass, tearing roots I had nurtured, flattening everything I had built with their heavy, careless steps. Neighbors stopped to watch. They lingered at the edges of the lawn, whispering to each other, smiling like they were in on some delightful secret. A few waved at me, saying things like, "How exciting," or "Can't wait for the big day," while ignoring the way my jaw was clenched so tightly it hurt. Miss Hargrove stopped by with her little dog, cooing at the tents. "Oh, it's going to be so beautiful," she said. "Don't worry, dear. It's just for one day. You'll be the talk of the community." She didn't see the way my hands were shaking, or maybe she saw and chose to ignore it, the same way she ignored the cracks in her perfect smile when she looked at me. One afternoon, I tried to stop the crew from unloading a massive speaker system onto the lawn. "This is my property," I said, standing in front of the truck, blocking the dolly. A man with a clipboard sighed, flipping through his papers. "Ma'am, we've been authorized to set up here. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA." "I am the issue. I live here." He looked at me like I was a stubborn child refusing to share a toy. "You're not being very community-minded, you know," he said before stepping around me, rolling the speakers across the grass, crushing a line of marigolds under the wheels. That was when the letters started. They slid them under my door, left them tucked in the mailbox, and once even taped one to my front window like a threat. They were fines for interfering with community events, for disturbing HOA-authorized personnel, for refusing to comply with event preparation guidelines. Each fine was small, $50 here, $75 there, but they added up quickly. I called, I emailed, I even went to the HOA office, standing in the waiting area while the receptionist refused to meet my eyes, tapping away at her keyboard while I explained, over and over, that I had never agreed to host this wedding. They didn't care. They told me it was in the bylaws I had signed when I moved in, that community event hosting was a shared responsibility. They told me I was being unreasonable and combative. They told me I should be grateful they considered my property suitable for such a joyous occasion. Outside the office, I sat in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the neat rows of townhomes across the street, every window reflecting the bright, cloudless sky like nothing was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. They were daring me to fight back. Because they didn't think I would. Because people like me weren't supposed to make trouble, weren't supposed to rock the boat, weren't supposed to say no. The wedding was only days away, and the tents were up, the chairs were lined in perfect rows, the flower arrangements were already wilting in the sun, waiting for a ceremony I never agreed to host. At night, I lay in bed, listening to the wind rustling the fabric of the tents, the creak of the stakes shifting in the dirt. It felt like an invasion, like they had come into my home and claimed it as their own, smiling and calling it community, while ignoring my voice entirely. And every morning, I would wake up, walk across the same floors, and tell myself, something has to give.